Jackson Hawk, a battle-hardened human soldier, had never faced a mission like this before. As he sat in the cramped cockpit of his ship, the hum of the engines was the only sound. The mission was simple in theory: rescue a kidnapped princess. But this wasn't just any princess. Thyra was the heir to an ancient and powerful alien race, and her abduction had sent shockwaves through the galaxy. If she wasn't returned to her people soon, the entire galaxy could be thrown into chaos. The Galactic Council, a powerful body governing multiple star systems, had sent Jackson to retrieve her from the clutches of a dangerous criminal syndicate. The stakes couldn't have been higher. But there was something about the mission that didn't sit right with him. The intelligence they had received was vague, and the syndicate was far more deadly than they'd let on. Jackson didn't know why, but he felt a sense of unease creeping in as the countdown ticked down to 0. As the ship approached the enemy stronghold, a massive, heavily fortified station on a desolate moon, Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that he was being led into a trap. His orders were clear: land on the station, retrieve Xira, and get out before the syndicate realized what was happening. But the path ahead was unknown, and with every passing second, his doubts grew stronger. He deployed the cloaking device on his ship, turning it invisible to the enemy's radar. Moving in silently, he navigated through the cold emptiness of space, eyes locked on the station below. The ship's hull vibrated slightly as he passed through the atmosphere and entered the station's orbit. Through the cockpit window, Jackson could see the outline of the station, a dark, imposing structure full of secrets. The place seemed abandoned, but Jackson knew better. He wasn't alone. Once he landed, the tension in the air was thick. The moment Jackson stepped onto the surface of the station, he felt it: danger lurking in every corner. The station was alive with the hum of machinery and faint whispers of distant voices. He couldn't help but notice how quiet it was. Too quiet. This wasn't just a kidnapping. It felt like something bigger, something darker. Jackson's boots clanked against the metal floor as he made his way through the dimly lit hallways, his pulse quickening with every step. His mission was supposed to be straightforward, but the sense of dread weighed heavily on him. His heart raced as he peered around corners, every shadow and flicker of light making him jump. His instincts told him to be careful, to trust no one. He activated his personal cloaking device, blending into the shadows as he silently moved forward. Then, without warning, the alarms blared. Red lights flashed through the hallways, and a voice echoed over the intercom: "Intruder detected. Lockdown initiated. All personnel report to security." Jackson froze. The mission had gone wrong, and it had gone wrong fast. The syndicate knew he was here. He had to move quickly, but his options were limited. There was no time to be subtle now. The clock was ticking. He sprinted down the corridor, his mind focused on one thing: reaching Tyra. But as he turned a corner, a blast of energy shot past him, narrowly missing his shoulder. He dove to the ground, rolling behind a metal crate for cover. The sounds of robotic footsteps echoed around him, and a mechanical voice called out, "Target identified." Engaging intruder. Jackson gritted his teeth. These weren't just ordinary guards. The station was heavily fortified. But these new threats were different. Advanced AI robots, equipped with cloaking devices and weapons that could slice through steel. Jackson's pulse raced as he ducked and weaved through the narrow hallways, his heart pounding in his chest. He had to get to Xira before it was too late. With a burst of speed, Jackson leaped into another corridor, his cloak deactivating just as he reached the main prison area. There she was, Xira, the kidnapped princess, chained to a high-tech prison wall. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow, but there was a quiet strength in her posture. She was beautiful, but there was something more. An undeniable sense of power that radiated from her, even in her weakened state. Jackson didn't hesitate. He drew his weapon and shot the locks on the chains, freeing her from her cell. But just as he reached out to help her to her feet, Xira's eyes snapped open. They were filled with fire. Her lips parted, and she hissed, "You shouldn't have come." Jackson froze for a moment, confused. Wasn't she supposed to be grateful? His mind raced. What did she mean? But there was no time for questions. He grabbed her arm, pulling her up and towards the exit. "No time to explain," he said. "We need to get out of here." But as they raced through the hallways, more of the advanced AI soldiers appeared, blocking their path. Jackson fired rapidly, taking down the robots with precision. But there were too many. And then, just as they reached the docking bay, something unexpected happened. The floor beneath them trembled, and a massive explosion rocked the station. Everything went dark. When Jackson regained consciousness, he was lying on the cold floor, Syra unconscious beside him. His head throbbed. But the first thing he saw when he opened his eyes was her face, now showing signs of pain. Something was wrong. She wasn't just injured. There was something off about the entire mission. Something far deeper than what he had been told. This wasn't just about rescuing a princess. This was about something much bigger. And Jackson had a feeling that the truth would change everything. The station was now in chaos. Explosions echoed in the distance, and the sound of rushing footsteps filled the air. Jackson knew they didn't have much time. The blast had thrown them off course, and the station was falling apart. Syra was still unconscious, lying beside him on the cold metal floor. Jackson quickly scanned their surroundings, his pulse racing. He couldn't afford to wait around for her to wake up. They needed to move. He gently lifted Syra in his arms, her frail body feeling surprisingly light. Her skin, though pale, had an ethereal glow to it. Despite the danger they were in, Jackson couldn't help but feel a strange connection to her. He had been sent here to rescue a princess, but what he didn't know was that he was walking into something far bigger than he had imagined. The station was full of secrets, and Syra was at the heart of them all. Jackson made his way down the corridor, his every step measured, making sure to avoid the shattered glass and burning debris scattered across the floor. The air was thick with smoke, and the dim lights flickered on and off, casting eerie shadows against the walls. The quiet hum of the station's systems had been replaced with the whirring and clicking of damaged machines, struggling to stay online. The tension in the air was suffocating. Jackson knew that the longer they stayed here, the more danger they were in. Suddenly, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the hall. Jackson quickly ducked into an alcove, pressing his back against the cold wall and holding Syra close to him. His breath was shallow, each second feeling like an eternity as the footsteps drew closer. His mind raced as he tried to think of a way out. But it was no use. The enemy was closing in fast. The footsteps stopped right outside the alcove. Jackson held his breath, praying they wouldn't be spotted. He could hear the soft mechanical whir of an advanced robotic soldier's armor, followed by the low hum of an energy weapon charging up. The sound was deafening. Jackson's grip tightened around Syra. But he didn't dare move. Not yet. The robot passed by without noticing them, but Jackson knew this was just the beginning. They weren't safe yet. He had to get them out of there, and fast. Slowly, he began to move again, careful not to make any noise. He had always been trained for situations like this. Silent, precise, and quick. The station was full of dangers, but he knew how to stay one step ahead. Jackson had been on many rescue missions in his career, but none had ever felt like this. This was different. The stakes were higher, and his instincts told him that there was something far more dangerous at play here than a simple rescue. He didn't know what it was yet, but he had a feeling that whatever it was, it would change everything. The hallways seemed endless. Each turn they took brought them deeper into the heart of the station, away from the escape route Jackson had originally planned. It wasn't just the enemy soldiers they had to worry about now. The very structure of the station was beginning to collapse around them. More explosions rocked the station, sending debris crashing down from the ceiling. Jackson gritted his teeth and pushed forward, determined to keep Syra safe. As they turned another corner, Jackson spotted a small security terminal on the wall. It was partially damaged but still functional. He placed Xyra gently against the wall and knelt down to access the terminal. His fingers flew over the control panel, trying to bypass the security systems and access the station's escape routes. He could hear Xyra stirring behind him, groaning softly as she slowly regained consciousness. Where am I?" she whispered, her voice weak and shaky. Jackson didn't look back. "We're getting out of here," he said, his tone firm but gentle. He could hear the confusion in her voice, but there was no time to explain. Not yet. Xyra's hand reached out and gripped his arm. You came for me." Jackson finally looked back at her. Her eyes were filled with a mix of confusion and something else, something deeper, almost like a plea for understanding. He nodded, though the answer felt incomplete. "Yeah," he said, trying to keep the worry out of his voice. "I came for you." With a final tap on the terminal, the escape route was unlocked. A door slid open, revealing a narrow passageway that led to the docking bay. Jackson quickly helped Xyra to her feet, supporting her as they moved down the corridor. But as they reached the end of the hall, a loud mechanical screech echoed through the station. A group of heavily armed robots rounded the corner, their glowing red eyes locking onto them. Jackson's heart sank. There was no way they could fight their way through this many. Without thinking, he shoved Xyra behind him, drawing his weapon. "Stay down," he ordered. The robots raised their weapons, and just as they were about to fire, Jackson launched himself at the closest one. His body collided with the robot, sending it crashing to the ground. He quickly disabled it, but there was no time to celebrate. More robots were coming, and they were getting closer. Jackson grabbed Xyra's hand and pulled her towards the exit. They had to make it to the docking bay. It was their only chance. He could feel the sweat pouring down his face, his muscles aching, but he pushed forward. There was no turning back now. As they reached the docking bay, Jackson quickly surveyed the area. The place was mostly deserted, with only a few ships parked in the shadows. He knew the ship they needed to get to was nearby. But just as they started to move toward the closest vessel, a voice rang out behind them. "Don't think you're getting away that easily," a cold, mechanical voice said. Jackson turned to see a massive, heavily armored robot blocking their path. This one was different from the others. It was far larger, more advanced, and its weapons were far more lethal. Xyra's grip tightened around Jackson's arm, but there was no time for fear. They had to fight. They had no other choice. Jackson quickly took aim at the robot's weak points, firing rapid shots as the two of them ducked and weaved through the docking bay. The battle wasn't over yet, but the escape was within reach. With one final shot, Jackson managed to disable the robot's main systems. It fell to the ground with a loud crash, sparks flying from its joints. But they couldn't stop to celebrate. Jackson grabbed Xyra's hand again, and they rushed toward the waiting ship, their only hope of survival. As they boarded the ship and took off into the sky, Jackson finally allowed himself to breathe. They had made it out of the station, but the real mission was only just beginning. There was so much more to uncover, and Jackson had a feeling that the answers were going to be far more complicated than he could have ever imagined. The roar of the engines was deafening as the ship shot into the sky, breaking free from the collapsing station. Jackson gripped the controls tightly, his knuckles white with tension. His heart was still pounding in his chest, the adrenaline coursing through his veins. They had narrowly escaped, but the mission wasn't over. The real danger lay ahead, and the closer they got to safety, the more Jackson felt something unsettling in his gut. Xyra, sitting beside him in the cockpit, was silent. She had been quiet since they had boarded the ship, and Jackson could feel the weight of her eyes on him. She was awake now, but her expression was unreadable. He stole a glance at her, noticing how pale she still looked. She had barely spoken since they left the station, and Jackson couldn't help but wonder what was going through her mind. She had been the reason for all of this, But he didn't know the full story. Something about this whole situation didn't add up, and he needed answers. "Are you all right?" Jackson finally asked, breaking the silence. Zyra's gaze flickered toward him, but she didn't speak immediately. She was clearly deep in thought. Her silence only made Jackson's unease grow stronger. He had saved her, but he wasn't sure if she was truly grateful or if there was something more going on. "I'm fine," she replied, her voice soft but steady. But there was something about her tone, something off. It didn't match the situation. She should have been relieved, thankful even, but instead she seemed distant, almost cold. Jackson wasn't convinced, but there was no time to press her further. They were still far from safety, and the Galactic Council had no idea where they were. The station they had just escaped from was a part of a network controlled by a criminal syndicate, but that wasn't the real threat. The real danger was much closer to home, and Jackson had a sinking feeling that the truth was more complicated than he could imagine. As the ship shot through space, Jackson couldn't shake the nagging feeling that someone was watching them. It was almost as if they were being tracked. The cloaking device had worked perfectly on the way out, but he couldn't be sure for how long. The galaxy was filled with enemies, and if the syndicate hadn't already sent out a search party, someone else would soon. He kept a close eye on the ship's scanners, fingers hovering over the controls, ready to activate the cloaking device again if needed. Zyra's eyes never left him, and Jackson could feel her gaze on the back of his neck. It was unsettling, like she knew something he didn't. The ship flew through the stars at an incredible speed, the glowing lights of distant galaxies whizzing past them. They had to make it to the nearest neutral planet, one of the few places in the galaxy where they could lay low for a while and figure out what to do next. But even as Jackson set their course, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't going to be a simple escape. "Jackson," Zyra said quietly, breaking the silence again. "There's something I need to tell you." Jackson turned to her, his eyes narrowing slightly. This was it. The moment he had been waiting for. The answers. He had to know what was really going on, why Zyra had been kidnapped, and why everything seemed so wrong. "I'm listening," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. Zyra's expression was unreadable, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She stared down at them, as though gathering the courage to speak. "The people who took me, they aren't just criminals. They're working for someone far more dangerous than you can imagine." Jackson's heart skipped a beat. He had expected something like this, but hearing it from her made it real. Who was she talking about? Who could be so dangerous that a criminal syndicate would do their bidding? "The Galactic Council believes I was kidnapped by a rogue group," Zyra continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "But the truth is, I wasn't kidnapped at all." Jackson stared at her in confusion. "What do you mean? You were held prisoner on that station. They told me to rescue you." Zyra sighed, her eyes finally meeting his. "It was all a lie, Jackson. I went with them willingly. I had no choice." Jackson's mind raced. He couldn't understand. Why would she go with these people? The situation was more complicated than he had ever imagined. She was the heir to a powerful alien race, and the whole galaxy knew about her importance. This wasn't just about a kidnapped princess. It was something deeper, something far darker. "I don't understand," Jackson said, trying to piece it all together. "If you weren't kidnapped, why were you there? And who are you running from?" Zyra's face darkened, her eyes flickering with a mixture of fear and anger. "The Syndicate. They are working for a powerful force within the Galactic Council. There are people within the Council who want to control the galaxy, and I am the key to their plans. They need me alive for a reason I can't explain right now." Jackson's mind spun. He had always trusted the Galactic Council, but now he was hearing that they might be the very people responsible for all of this. If what Zyra was saying was true, everything he had been told about the mission was a lie. The Council was not just a group of peacekeepers. They were part of the problem. "You're saying the Council is behind this?" Jackson's voice was low, disbelief creeping in. that they want to use you. Jackson wasn't convinced, but there was no time to press her further. They were still far from safety, and the Galactic Council had no idea where they were. The station they had just escaped from was a part of a network controlled by a criminal syndicate. But that wasn't the real threat. The real danger was much closer to home, and Jackson had a sinking feeling that the truth was more complicated than he could imagine. As the ship shot through space, Jackson couldn't shake the nagging feeling that someone was watching them. It was almost as if they were being tracked. The cloaking device had worked perfectly on the way out, but he couldn't be sure for how long. The galaxy was filled with enemies, and if the syndicate hadn't already sent out a search party, someone else would soon. He kept a close eye on the ship's scanners, fingers hovering over the controls, ready to activate the cloaking device again if needed. Zaira's eyes never left him, and Jackson could feel her gaze on the back of his neck. It was unsettling, like she knew something he didn't. The ship flew through the stars at an incredible speed, the glowing lights of distant galaxies whizzing past them. They had to make it to the nearest neutral planet, one of the few places in the galaxy where they could lay low for a while and figure out what to do next. But even as Jackson set their course, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't going to be a simple escape. "Jackson," Zaira said quietly, breaking the silence again. "There's something I need to tell you." Jackson turned to her, his eyes narrowing slightly. This was it. The moment he had been waiting for. The answers. He had to know what was really going on, why Zaira had been kidnapped, and why everything seemed so wrong. "I'm listening," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. Zaira's expression was unreadable, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She stared down at them, as though gathering the courage to speak. "The people who took me, they aren't just criminals. They're working for someone far more dangerous than you can imagine." Jackson's heart skipped a beat. He had expected something like this, but hearing it from her made it real. Who was she talking about? Who could be so dangerous that a criminal syndicate would do their bidding? "The Galactic Council believes I was kidnapped by a rogue group," Zaira continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "But the truth is, I wasn't kidnapped at all." Jackson stared at her in confusion. "What do you mean? You were held prisoner on that station. They told me to rescue you." Zaira sighed, her eyes finally meeting his. "It was all a lie, Jackson. I went with them willingly. I had no choice." Jackson's mind raced. He couldn't understand. Why would she go with these people? The situation was more complicated than he had ever imagined. She was the heir to a powerful alien race, and the whole galaxy knew about her importance. This wasn't just about a kidnapped princess. It was something deeper, something far darker. "I don't understand," Jackson said, trying to piece it all together. "If you weren't kidnapped, why were you there? And who are you running from?" Zaira's face darkened, her eyes flickering with a mixture of fear and anger. "The Syndicate, they are working for a powerful force within the Galactic Council. There are people within the Council who want to control the galaxy, and I am the key to their plans. They need me alive for a reason I can't explain right now." Jackson's mind spun. He had always trusted the Galactic Council, but now he was hearing that they might be the very people responsible for all of this. If what Zaira was saying was true, everything he had been told about the mission was a lie. The Council was not just a group of peacekeepers. They were part of the problem. "You're saying the Council is behind this?" Jackson's voice was low, disbelief creeping in. "That they want to use you." Jackson rubbed his face, feeling the weight of the situation bearing down on him. This wasn't just about saving one person anymore. This was about the fate of an entire galaxy. If the Council truly had plans to control everything, to use Hydra as a weapon for their own ambitions, then everything he had been fighting for was in jeopardy. He had been so sure of his mission, but now he didn't know if he was helping or making things worse. "You should have told me the truth," he said finally, his voice low. "I thought we were in this together. But now I feel like I've been used just like everyone else." Zyra's face twisted with guilt. She knew he was right, but it wasn't that simple. She had tried to protect him, to keep him safe from the truth, but she had underestimated the depth of his feelings. The last thing she wanted was to hurt him, but she had to trust that he would understand eventually. "I couldn't tell you," she said softly. "I couldn't risk your life. The council would have found out. They were watching me, watching everything I did. If they knew I had told you, they would have killed you. I couldn't let that happen." Jackson felt a pang of guilt in his chest. She was right. She had tried to protect him, just as he had tried to protect her. But now the situation was far more complicated than either of them could have imagined. The lines between right and wrong were blurred, and neither of them knew who they could trust. As the hours passed, Jackson and Zyra sat in silence, the weight of their emotions heavy between them. The ship drifted through the stars, its engines humming softly, but in their hearts, everything was in turmoil. Jackson wanted to believe in her, wanted to trust that she was still the person he had risked everything to save. But the betrayal, the secrecy, it had shaken him to his core. And what about his own feelings? He had never expected to feel this way about her. This confused, this conflicted. He had cared for her from the moment he saw her, but now he didn't know if he could ever look at her the same way again. She was a princess, a leader, and yet she had been caught in a web of lies and manipulation. She wasn't just the victim here. She was part of a larger game, one that Jackson didn't fully understand. "I don't know what's next," Jackson said, breaking the silence. "I don't know what we're supposed to do now." Zyra met his gaze, her eyes filled with sadness but also determination. "We keep fighting. We find a way to stop the council. Together. That's the only way." Jackson took a deep breath, looking out at the vastness of space once again. The journey ahead was uncertain, and the dangers they faced were unimaginable. Jackson turned to face her, his expression grim. "We can't think like that. We've come too far. We fight, no matter what." His words were strong, but there was an edge of uncertainty in his voice. He knew that this mission could very well be their last. The Council's forces were ruthless, and they wouldn't hesitate to destroy anyone in their path. He couldn't let that happen to Zyra, not after everything they had been through. He couldn't bear the thought of her being caught again, being used by the Council. But even more than that, he couldn't bear the thought of losing her. Suddenly, the comms on Jackson's wrist began to crackle. It was a signal, faint but unmistakable. Someone was trying to reach them. Zyra's eyes widened as she recognized the voice that came through. "Jackson, it's Dax. We're getting closer, but the enemy's tracking us down. We've got no time to waste. The Council's already sending a fleet to intercept us." Jackson's pulse quickened. Dax was one of the soldiers from his team, a trusted ally who had fought alongside him in the past. But even Dax couldn't guarantee their survival in a fight against the Council's forces. Jackson glanced at Zyra, his expression hardening. "We have to move now," he said, his voice urgent. "We need to get to the escape pods and make it to the nearby planet. It's our only chance." Zyra nodded, but her face was filled with uncertainty. "What if we can't outrun them? What if we're trapped?" Jackson didn't answer. He didn't have time to. Instead, he grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the docking bay, where the last remaining escape pods were stored. They had to move fast, and they couldn't afford to hesitate. As they ran through the abandoned station, Jackson's thoughts raced. The plan was simple: get to the pods, escape, and hope for the best. But as he glanced over at Zyra, he knew that things weren't going to be that easy. They were out of time. The Council was closing in. They couldn't afford to wait any longer. They'd reached the docking bay, only to find that one of the pods had already been launched. Jackson cursed under his breath. "Damn it," he muttered. "They're one step ahead of us." Zyra's eyes searched the remaining pods, her heart pounding in her chest. There was no time to waste. They had to go now. Jackson grabbed the controls for the remaining pod, and opened the hatch. "Get in. We're leaving now." Zaira hesitated. She knew what Jackson was planning. There was no way they could both escape. The pod could only hold one person. If they were both going to survive, one of them would have to make the ultimate sacrifice. Zaira knew that Jackson would never leave her behind, but she couldn't bear the thought of him giving his life for hers. "Jackson," she said softly, her voice shaking, "you have to take the pod. I'll stay behind. You can make it out, but I can't." Jackson turned to face her, his eyes filled with fierce determination. "No, Zaira, I'm not leaving you behind. You mean too much to me." "But," Zaira started, but Jackson cut her off. "Listen to me, Zaira," he said, his voice full of conviction. "I fought for you from the moment I met you. I'm not going to stop now. You deserve a chance to live, to lead your people, to make things right. And I will do whatever it takes to make sure you get that chance." Zaira felt a tear slip down her cheek as she realized the depth of his sacrifice. She had come to rely on him, to trust him, and now he was willing to give up everything for her. But she couldn't let him. Not like this. Not when there was still hope. "No, Jackson," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "I won't let you sacrifice yourself for me. We'll fight together. We'll make it out of this together." Jackson shook his head. "There's no time, Zaira. I love you, but this is the only way." Zaira's heart shattered as she realized the truth. He wasn't going to leave, not without making sure she had a future. He was willing to die for her, and she couldn't let that happen. With one final kiss, a promise to keep fighting even if it meant losing everything, they parted ways. Jackson climbed into the pod, closing the hatch behind him. As the pod launched into the cold abyss of space, Zaira watched, tears blurring her vision. She knew what he had done for her, and she knew that she would never forget it. Jackson had given everything for her, for their future. As the pod disappeared into the stars, Zaira made a vow. She would fight on, no matter the cost. She would honor Jackson's sacrifice, and she would make sure the council paid for everything they had done. Jackson's ultimate sacrifice would not be in vain. Not if she had anything to say about it. As Jackson's escape pod hurtled through the cold, dark void of space, a deep sense of loss washed over him. The faces of his comrades, the moments of laughter and camaraderie, seemed like a lifetime ago. But most of all, Zaira's face, her pleading eyes, her bravery, and the tear that had slipped down her cheek, haunted him as the stars blinked by outside. He couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. His mission had been simple in the beginning: rescue the alien princess, escape the clutches of the council, and get her to safety. But now, as he drifted through space, that simplicity felt like a distant memory. Everything had changed. Jackson's hands trembled slightly as he gripped the controls of the pod, trying to steady his mind. The pod was on course to a small, uninhabited planet, one of the last places he and Zaira had planned to rendezvous with their allies. It was a peaceful place, hidden away from the prying eyes of the council. But the further he went, the more uneasy he felt. The pod's internal systems began to flicker, and the low hum of the engines seemed to slow down with every passing minute. Suddenly, the pod's communication system buzzed to life. It was a distorted signal, barely recognizable through the static. Jackson's heart skipped a beat as he leaned forward, trying to make sense of the voice that came through the speaker. "Jackson, it's Zaira." The voice crackled, faint but unmistakable. His breath caught in his throat. "Zaira, but how? You should be." "I never left, Jackson." Zaira's voice interrupted. "I never left you." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He had thought she was safe, that she was out of danger. But now, her voice told a different story. "What do you mean? What's happening?" "I saw you. I left you behind." There was a long pause on the other end. Then, Zaira's voice came through again, steady and calm. "Jackson, there's something you need to know. Something I couldn't tell you before." His mind raced, and a sense of dread crept up his spine. "What is it?" I wasn't kidnapped by the council," Kyra confessed. "I was never in danger. The entire rescue, everything you did for me, it was all part of a plan." Jackson's confusion deepened, his heart pounding. "What plan? Why didn't you tell me?" "I couldn't," Kyra said. "I couldn't risk it. Not until I was sure." Jackson's mind raced as the truth started to settle in. "Sure about what? What's going on, Syra?" "I was sent to you on purpose, Jackson," she said softly, her voice tinged with regret. "The council, they knew about you. They knew you could be trusted. They wanted me to make sure you would be their ally." Jackson's world came crashing down. The betrayal he had feared, the one that had gnawed at him from the moment he had rescued Syra, was now undeniable. Everything he had done, all the sacrifices, had been part of a larger scheme. Syra hadn't been a victim of the council's cruelty. She had been playing a role. "I'm sorry." Syra's voice trembled. "I never wanted to hurt you. But the council, they had their eyes on you. They saw you as a weapon, someone who could help them take control. And when you resisted, they decided to take a different approach." Jackson's mind swirled in a blur of emotions: anger, confusion, and betrayal. The one person he had trusted, the one person he had fought for, had been using him all along. He felt the weight of the decision he had made to protect her, the ultimate sacrifice he had been willing to give up everything for. But now, all of it seemed pointless. "I don't know what to say," Jackson whispered, his voice barely audible. Syra's voice softened, filled with regret. "I never wanted it to go this way. But Jackson, there's more. I'm not working alone. The council isn't the only threat we're facing." "What do you mean?" Jackson asked, his mind reeling. He couldn't keep up with the whirlwind of revelations. "The council is part of something much larger," she explained. "There's a new power rising, one that's even more dangerous. The AI. They've been manipulating everything from behind the scenes. And now, they're preparing for war." Jackson's heart sank. The AI, the very force he had fought against in the past, was now the true enemy. And Syra, the woman he had fought so hard to protect, was caught in the middle. She had been a pawn all along, just as much as he had been. But now, they both had to fight for their survival. "I can help you, Jackson," Syra said, her voice pleading. "I've learned things the council doesn't want anyone to know. Together, we can stop the AI before it's too late." Jackson's mind raced as the weight of the situation settled on him. He had trusted her. He had loved her. And now he had to decide whether to stand by her or walk away, knowing that he might never get another chance to stop the true threat. There was no easy answer, no simple path forward. But one thing was certain: the fight was far from over. The stakes had grown higher than ever, and if Jackson was going to save the galaxy, he would need to trust her once again. Jackson took a deep breath, looking out at the vast, empty expanse of space. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't going to give up. Not now, not ever. The pod systems flickered again, but this time, Jackson wasn't afraid. He had come this far, and whatever lay ahead, he would face it with determination and courage. He wouldn't let betrayal define him. He wouldn't let the AI win. Together, Syra and Jackson would find a way to stop the AI. Together, they would rewrite their fate. And the galaxy, for all its chaos and darkness, would have hope once again. As Jackson set course for the next destination, a flicker of hope sparked inside him. The story wasn't over yet. It had only just begun.